Hello everyone, my name is John Bristow. I'm a member of the Developer Relations team at Progress. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to watch today's webinar. Joining me are my colleagues Ed, Sam, and Stefan. Together, we'll walk you through the features we've added to the R1’18 release of Telerik UI. This covers the tools and UI controls that we make to help you build web, mobile, desktop, and reporting solutions. Every app deserves a sleek design, one that's not only pleasing to the eye, but easy to navigate. We believe all developers should say no to ugly apps and be able to quickly create apps with outstanding user experience. Before we begin, it's important to let you know that everything we'll be showing you here today is available online. So, make sure to fire up the Telerik control panel to download any updates. Individual product updates are also available through your account page on telerik.com. Webinars can be tough to sit through. If you get distracted or pulled away from your desk, don't worry. This webinar will be available on YouTube. You can find our channel at youtube.com/Telerik. Our goal is to answer as many questions as possible on Twitter through the Hey Telerik hashtag. Please use this hashtag because it will help us find your questions. We'll be giving away an Xbox One X console. Yes, you heard that right, to one lucky attendee who asks the best question. We'll also be drawing someone at random to win a drone with an integrated camera. It's our way of thanking you for being here for today's webinar. Please note that this prize is subject to our sweepstake rules. A couple more housekeeping items to mention. Everyone should keep an eye open for the wrap-up blog post that we'll be publishing shortly after the conclusion of today's webinar. You'll be able to find this up on the Telerik blog site, which should be your homepage, and if it's not, please subscribe to the RSS feed or bookmark it. You can find the Telerik blog site at blogs.telerik.com. And now on to the main part of our webinar. To speak more about what's new in the R1’18 release, I'd like to pass things over to our product manager in our developer toolings division, Stefan Stefanov.
Thanks, John, and hello everyone. I'm really excited to kick off this webinar and to introduce you to the highlights of the R1’18 release. Our core purpose is to boost your developer productivity in delivering beautiful and feature-rich applications that delight your users across all channels. The Telerik DevCraft is our ultimate tooling for you as .NET developers, and it covers the most relevant web, mobile, and desktop technologies across all .NET and JavaScript frameworks that we believe are relevant to you as .NET developers. With R1’18, we have pushed ourselves to the limits across the whole product portfolio. Starting with web, we delivered OData v4 support in Telerik UI for ASP.NET MVC and Core. In addition, you can now enjoy more TagHelpers in ASP.NET Core. On the AJAX front, we delivered plenty of accessibility enhancements to cover the latest Section 508 and WCAG 2.0 guidelines, as well as updates to cover the latest versions of the major browsers we support. On the JavaScript tooling, besides the existing jQuery and Angular-based components, we have introduced the official release of the brand new native Kendo UI for React and Component Suite. To learn more about the latest additions to the different flavors of Kendo UI, please join our Kendo UI webinar February 1st at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, where we will go extensively through them. On the mobile front, with our Telerik UI for Xamarin offering that allows building truly native mobile applications for Android, iOS, and UWP from a single C# codebase, we have delivered the RTM version of the data grid components, button, entry, and numeric components, as well as convenient toolbox for working with the controls at design time with just drag and drop. On the desktop side, as usual, we took care of making sure that your WinForms and WPF applications can utilize the latest design trends. With the introduction of Fluent Theme for both WPF and WinForms, you can easily modernize your applications and make your user happier. On top of that, we released built-in PDF and spread toolbar components for WPF and the barcode component in the WinForms suite, allowing you to generate a variety of barcode formats for any scenario. As you very well know, And if you don't now, you'll learn, Telerik Reporting is a powerful solution for creating and displaying a variety of reports to any platform, web, mobile, and desktop. In this release, I am proud to announce that we have greatly expanded the number of data sources Telerik Reporting and Telerik Reporting Server can connect to, with plenty of new backend providers, thanks to the integrated ODBC driver support provided by the Data Direct connectivity solution. On top of that, you can enjoy fully localizable report designer as well as convenient GitHub repo for collaboration on building up localization streams for new languages. Lastly, I wanted to share with you the latest addition in our mocking tooling, that is support for web-based builds. With the convenient VS Test build task, you can execute tests built with just mock on your build machines.
Thanks, Stefan. Now let's turn things over to Ed Charbonneau. Ed's going to show off the latest features we've added to our product line for web developers.
In the first release of 2018, we've updated several of our ASP.NET AJAX controls with improved accessibility features and stability. We've always been interested in supporting developers and organizations committed to building accessible applications for people with disabilities. This is why we're committed to delivering highly accessible UI components to help you give everyone equal access to your application without having to write additional code. We've improved stability in this release with improved browser compliance with support for the latest editions of all major browsers, along with several regression issues around browser support. This release of Telerik UI for ASP.NET MVC includes an update to the scheduler widget to allow multiple item selection. A new button group widget was added, and Telerik UI for ASP.NET MVC continues to improve upon OData 4 support. In this, batch processing support was included. We're proud to share that we're kicking off the new year by closing a record number of issues. Now let's jump straight into some demos of the scheduler, button group, and OData support. To use the new multi-select feature in the scheduler widget, I'm going to demonstrate using demos.telerik.com. Here I've selected the month view to get a nice broad look over many items at once. And if I'd like to move more than one item across the scheduler, I could simply click and then use the control click to select multiple items at one time. Once they're all selected, I can move them together. Next, let's take a look at the OData support using the data grid. Again, I'm going to go back to demos.telerik.com, and you can see we have a grid that's already bound to some OData. Now, in this data grid, we have filters on each column. I'm going to go ahead and use the one under ship name here, and let's find something that contains one of everybody's favorite things, beer. Let's go ahead and filter, and you can see that just the results that contain beer are returned. Now to see how this works, I've left open Fiddler in the background. Fiddler is a web debugging tool that is free to download from Progress. If I look at the URL that is being generated by the data source that is bound to the data grid, you can see that the URL is being formed automatically. It's using the proper OData parameters to filter from the OData API. As you can see here, it has substring of, and there's our search query for beer on the ship name column. Again, this is all being generated from the Telerik UI for ASP.NET MVC data source. Now let's take a look at the new button group widget. First, we'll start with a simple HTML helper. We'll call @html.kendo button group. And as with any widget, we need to give that a name. And we're going to call this player because we're going to be building a simple play, stop, pause control like you'd find in an audio player. Now to add items to this button group, we'll simply declare the items and add them one at a time to the button group. Now here you can see I've added an item with the text play and an icon of play. So nice thing about these Kendo UI widgets is they fully support the Kendo UI icons that are included in the framework. So with play, stop, pause added, I can go ahead and run this application. And with the application running, you can see, as one might suspect, the play, stop, pause buttons that are all grouped together in this nice button group widget. Now that we have the button group on the page, let's add some events to see how they work, since they're a little bit different than our standard button. To this list of items, I'm going to add an event. And I'm going to tell the group that I want to capture the select event with a JavaScript function named onSelect. Now, the next thing I need to do is add some JavaScript to this. And for the sake of demos, we're going to just simply output that text to another control on the screen. So we're going to find the item with the output ID, which is this h2 tag here. And then we're just going to render the selected item index right out to that control. So let's go back to our browser and refresh, and we should be able to capture those events now. And when we click play, pause, and stop, you can see that we get these selected indexes that belong to those buttons. So there's how you wire up a new button group control. This is a milestone release for Telerik UI for ASP.NET Core. We have more than doubled the number of tag helpers in this release, with over 30 tag helpers available. This includes our most popular widget, the grid, and a new drag and drop feature. Let's talk more about tag helpers and then see some in action. Tag helpers are all about writing front-end code in your preferred coding style. If you're extremely C# oriented, then Razor HTML helpers might be your choice. If you're a JavaScript guru, then you might choose to use Kendo UI directly. Now with ASP.NET Core, we have another choice of tag helpers. Tag helpers look and act much more like HTML components by using tags and attributes. It's important to remember that with all three styles, the same HTML and JavaScript is produced. Some quick facts about tag helpers is that they use tags and attributes like HTML. However, they're rendered server-side using Razor. Now, they're supported by IntelliSense with some additional benefits that you don't get from HTML helpers. In addition to C#, we also get IntelliSense for HTML and CSS. Now, tag helpers aren't going to eliminate Razor and HTML helpers completely. And while they tend to look like web forms, there's no view state or any type of web forms functionality being added to your solution. To see the benefits of tag helpers versus HTML helpers, let's do a quick side-by-side comparison. Now, if we wanted to add some custom CSS classes to an HTML action link, we'd have to new up an anonymous object, and it can get kind of messy. All right, maybe the source code for Doom 2 there is a little bit of an exaggeration, but if you don't remember to escape these correctly and you don't know all of the Bootstrap classes off the top of your head, it can be a little difficult. Razor can parse the tag helper exactly like it can the HTML helper, rendering the exact same result. To get started, simply use the Create New Project dialog from within Visual Studio. All of the Telerik templates for ASP.NET Core come with tag helpers pre-enabled. If you'd like to add tag helpers to an existing project, then visit docs.telerik.com and click Tag Helpers from the menu, and we'll walk you through the process. All right, so enough with the tag helper review. Let's get into Visual Studio and write some code. For this example, we're going to use the new button group widget using an HTML helper and convert it into a tag helper. Before we do the conversion, let's take a look and see what it looks like in the browser. Notice we can select play, pause, and stop, and we retrieve the index of the button. Let's go back into Visual Studio and let's modify this slightly. What I want to do is increase the size of the buttons using a CSS class. Now, if I do .html attributes, I get IntelliSense until I start adding the actual CSS class itself. Now notice it even gives me a little bit of extra help that I don't need. And then when I type in class, I have to escape the word class and set this equal to, and I want to say h2, but notice there's no IntelliSense being shown for this h2 class. So this is a Bootstrap class. I'd love to have some IntelliSense here. Now, let's save this, go back to the browser, and we'll do a refresh. Notice we have much bigger buttons now because it's taking on that H2 class from Bootstrap. Let's go back again and let's convert this over to into a tag helper so we can see what the difference is between the tag helper and the HTML helper. So I'm going to paste in some new code here. And notice this looks a lot like HTML. We have the Kendo button group. We gave it a name. And to bind it to our onSelect function, we'll do a on-select and give it the method name. And then much like with the HTML helper, we'll just add new items to this array. Now, if we run this, save and run in the browser, this should look identical to what we had before. Now, notice we don't have that larger size in there yet because we haven't added our CSS class. If I go back to the code, to add the CSS class with a tag helper is much easier. I can type in the word class, just like if I had HTML, and now I have IntelliSense, and I can say H2, and if I save this, and once again, back in the browser, we'll see that new larger size appear. Now it's much, much easier for us to go in and add these class names without all of the escape characters and anonymous objects. For this next demo, let's create a data grid using tag helpers from scratch. So first, let's start out with a simple tag helper to define the grid. We'll do a Kendo, open a brace, type Kendo, and notice we get IntelliSense here. And we can scan this list for other controls. In our case, we're going to use grid. And then notice the IntelliSense continues, and we'll give our grid a name. We'll call it grid. And that should be the basic element that we need to start our grid. Now, the grid would be nothing without some data, so let's define a data source. Once we're inside of our grid tag, notice that those items from IntelliSense change to support only what we can define within that tag. So we'll set a data source with a type of data source tag helper type, and we'll set that to AJAX because we're going to call back for some JSON data to bind. Now the next thing we need is a transport, and we'll set this transport to have a read operation. And we're going to read from a URL. And remember when I said we won't be doing away completely with Razor, we'll actually use some Razor here to go ahead and get the actual action that we want to call to get our data. And we'll use orders underscore read. We'll pull our data from that action, and that action sits on our grid controller. So this will form the proper URL for our data source to get its read action from. And now we should be able to save this and go into our browser and render the page. So right now we're adding all of the data from our data source, and it's automatically picking column names, and that's pretty powerful and useful stuff, but let's do something a little more fine-tuned, and let's also add some features to this grid. So back to our source code, underneath of our data source, we'll add some of these features, and we'll make this a groupable, sortable, pageable grid, and enable filtering as well. So let's save this, return to our grid, and refresh the page. And notice we have grouping by drag and drop, and we also have filters enabled on our data set. Let's take this one step further. We'll come back in. Let's define some specific columns from our data source now. So we'll go back into our HTML workflow of our Kendo grid and add our columns here. And you can see we're adding our fields, and we're specifying the title to include a space in the name where it didn't before. Now, I've also got a special filtering capability added to this column with the attribute of multi set to true. We'll see what that does in the browser as well. So let's go back to our application and refresh. And now we have our columns with our specific titles that we defined. And remember, we set a special filter on ship name. If we look at freight, you can see we have the show items equal to, and then we can filter kind of ad hoc. But on ship name, notice we get a nice drop-down list of items to select from. So we could do something like, give me all of the items that are Keith and Leroy. We'll click filter, and then just those items will show up in the grid. So that's how you create a grid using the new TagHelper system. And it's pretty amazing the way things flow together using this HTML-like syntax. So I have time for one more quick demo. Let's go to demos.telerik.com again, and let's take a look at the drag and drop demo that we have here. Now, this demo is unique because it lets us append functionality to existing HTML elements. So for example, we have two HTML elements here, and now I can drag and drop the small circle onto the big circle as a target. So how does this work? Let's scroll down and take a look at the source code and let me explain. So we have two div elements on this page, and instead of the entire element being driven by a tag helper, instead we're just tacking on additional functionality to an existing HTML element by defining an attribute. Now this attribute is Kendo drop target, and when we set that to true, that tells Kendo UI that this is a drop target. And we can set event handlers up to handle what happens when elements are dropped onto that target. Now, to create the draggable item, the smaller circle in this demo, we set the Kendo draggable item to attribute to true, and then we can again set the functionality of the events up for what happens when we start and end that drag. Now, in your app, to handle this on the JavaScript side, we're just calling these various functions when events fire, and that lets us append that functionality to these raw div elements and add something new to them. Now, this can be used on any HTML element in your application. That's something unique to TagHelpers that you cannot currently do with HTML helpers. All right, ASP.NET developers, you've decided to learn Angular and you realize there's going to be a bit of a learning curve. For your next project, you'll need to learn TypeScript, NPM, Webpack, and somewhere in the process, you'll want to do some server-side rendering. Now, integrating all of these things into an ASP.NET application can be a challenge. So what if there was an easier way to get up and running so you can integrate faster and learn at a more reasonable pace? That's why we're excited to announce that in this release, we've made a new template available for Kendo UI, Angular, and the ASP.NET stack. This is an all-in-one solution with ASP.NET Core and Angular pre-integrated. Everything is included and pre-configured for NPM, Webpack, and even server-side rendering. The application is organized like a typical ASP.NET MVC application with the view layer utilizing Angular instead of Razor. This means that we can use familiar concepts on the backend like C#, SQL, Entity Framework, and the Azure ecosystem. It's easy to get started from either Visual Studio or the .NET command line. That's right, you can use the template from the command line while developing on Mac, Linux, and Windows using your favorite editor like Visual Studio. Enough of the hype, let's take a look and see the template in action. To get started from Visual Studio, let's click File, New Project, and then we'll choose Kendo UI for Angular, ASP.NET Core and MVC application. We'll click OK to get started. Now that the application has been created, let's take a look and see what was generated for us. If we take a look under the Dependencies node, you'll see that we have NPM. All of the packages have been installed by Visual Studio. As soon as it recognizes that package.json file, it will automatically install all of these dependencies. Next, if we navigate down to the client app folder, This is the folder that contains all of our Angular code and components. Further down, we have controllers. These are normal ASP.NET MVC controllers. And then we have a views folder. Now the views are a little different in this application. They're only there to bootstrap the Angular application on the client. And the rest of this is configuration, such as the TypeScript config and Webpack config files. Now let's run the application and see what this looks like. And we'll do some experiments with the components that are pre-installed for us. With the application up and running, you can see that we have our components here on the left-hand side, all of which are powered by Kendo UI, built on native Angular code. Now, if we look at our increment component, you can see we have this nice Kendo UI button. If we click on it, it increments this counter. Let's take a look at the source code for this. Again, we're going to go to Client App, Counter, and here you can see the template for that component, as well as the code for that component. If we look at the template, you can see that when we click the Kendo button, we're using this increment counter function. In our counter component, you can see that increment counter function, and all it does is simply increments this current count value from 0, and it increments it by 1. So what I want to do is a little experiment, and let's change this increment method to a decrement method. I'll save this and go back into the browser. Remember, our current count is 4, but this component initializes at 0. So notice that change to 0. And when I click increment, now it decrements. Notice I did not refresh the browser, or you did not see a full page refresh here. That's because the template comes with Webpack's hot module reloading already pre-configured. So all of the code changes were changed on the fly in this view while it's live and running in the browser. How cool is that? Now that you've seen it, let's talk about how you can get it. You can get the new Kendo UI for Angular project template from the Visual Studio Marketplace at marketplace.visualstudio.com, or you can simply click on the Extensions and Updates dialog directly in Visual Studio. For command line users, use the install switch with the .NET new command, followed by the template name, Progress ASP.NET Core SPA Templates Angular. Once you have it installed, just do .NET New, Kendo NG, then run your npm install and .NET Run to get started.
Thanks, Ed. Now, if you're interested in hearing more about the latest features in Kendo UI, I'd strongly encourage you to check out that webinar on February 1st. Sam Basu is our expert on all things mobile. He's going to spend some time talking about the improvements we've made to our products for mobile developers.
All right. So thank you, John, Stefan, and Ed for getting us this far. Let's switch gears to a hot topic area and let's talk all things mobile. Once again, my name is Sam Basu, and that is my Twitter handle if you need to get hold of me after this webinar. Now, there are many ways in which you can build mobile apps, but Xamarin pretty much dominates the mobile landscape for .NET developers. You can reuse your existing skills of C# and .NET to build apps for just about any platform you can think of. And these are truly native cross-platform apps. It's a really good story. Now, let us quickly recap how we build apps with Xamarin. This is the traditional UI approach, or what we also know as Xamarin iOS or Xamarin Android. This is where we write our business logic in an abstracted C# layer, which is shared across platforms, but we write separate UI heads for iOS, Android, Windows, or other platforms. And then we have the Xamarin Forms approach, where we have a shared UI code layer, which we write in XAML, and at runtime, it gets rendered out as native UI controls on each platform. Now, earlier, when you started Xamarin development, you sort of had to choose one way or the other between native and abstracted UI. I don't think that's a decision point anymore because you can mix and match things so nicely. If you're doing Xamarin iOS or Android, you can embed Xamarin Forms inside. If you're doing Xamarin Forms, you can step into native land and render native controls on a per platform basis. And Xamarin Forms keeps adding more and more platforms that you can support with your apps, things like macOS or Samsung Tizen or even web and WPF. I think this is a really good time to be a Xamarin developer, and it's going to keep getting better. Now, however you want to build your Xamarin apps, we want to make sure that you have the best possible tools to make beautiful, native, cross-platform apps, and that is through Telerik UI for Xamarin. Now, if you are new to using our Xamarin suite, let me tell you a little bit as to how we can help. We are in the business of making developers successful. We want you to focus on your app's features rather than sweating on the UI. Telerik UI for Xamarin is a collection of polished UI controls that are native to each platform, whether you use them from Xamarin iOS, Android, or Xamarin Forms wrappers. You can use our controls seamlessly whether you're on Visual Studio on Windows or VS for Mac. You can use our MSI installers to get the Visual Studio extension, or you can download the bits directly and reference them. If you have existing projects, you can bring in our bits through easy NuGet packages. If you have greenfield projects that you're starting on, we will give you some really nice Visual Studio templates to get you going. We spend a lot of engineering efforts to make sure each of our UI controls looks beautiful, has tons of customization APIs, and is extremely performance tuned, so you can simply light up your apps. Now, you do not have to take my word for this. Search for Telerik UI for Xamarin sample apps in each of your respective app stores and actually play with our UI controls in your own hand and decide for yourself. Our goal is to make the best possible Xamarin UI for all you .NET ninjas. Now, we've been pretty busy, so let's take a look at what we lit up for you in our R1 2018 release. And we start with the mighty Visual Studio Toolbox. Now, as developers, sometimes we forget the sheer number of tools that are at our disposal, like the number of controls in our Xamarin suite. Now, wouldn't it be nice if you could see everything in one place? Well, now you can. As long as you have our bits, all of our controls are going to light up in this new Visual Studio Toolbox. And once you have it, it's just a matter of opening up a XAML page and doing drag and drop. We will make sure all of your code and the references are exactly right. And it's going to also show up in the Xamarin Forms previewer. So for developers, it's just a matter of flexibility. If you're happy handwriting your XAML, go for it. But if you're more of a visual person, this is for you. Okay, so the next big thing we have for you is the mighty data grid. Now, I'll be honest, I was a little hesitant at first to put grids on mobile apps, but this thing is legit for most enterprise line of business apps. And keep in mind, with Xamarin, you're not just building apps that will run on mobile phones, they will run on iPads or other similar tablets. So there's a very legit need for a full-featured grid. Our data grid has been in beta since the last release, and we've been busy cranking up all the features to make it everything that you expect from a Telerik data grid. It gives you a rich and performant way to visualize tabular data. And all of the features that you expect, like sorting, filtering, grouping, two-way data binding, they're all built in. And you don't have to do everything programmatically. We now have data operations through UI, so the user can actually set sorting, filtering based on his or her own criteria. With the data grid, you can do validations on data edits, custom styling, as well as bind it to hundreds and thousands of records. It'll still be fluid for the user. We are pretty pumped about the data grid. Let me show you more in the demos. Okay, so moving along, we are adding several new input controls in our Xamarin suite, starting with the numeric input control. This is one of those ubiquitously needed controls that lets your users increment or decrement numbers in your app. There's a new button control and there's a new entry control, both of which actually do have corresponding generic equivalents in the Xamarin Forms controls. So why would you use our Telerik controls over the built-in ones? Simply because the engineering efforts that we put in to make these controls completely flexible for you, the developer. There is no customization that you cannot do with these controls. Things like setting the borders, the layouts, the content, the foreground, background, really controlling exactly how these input controls look like. And they have full support for theming, so they look consistent with the rest of your app. And with that, let me actually jump out of my slides and show you a quick demo of some of these new controls. Alright, so I am on my Mac desktop here, and I'm going to show you some code in Visual Studio for Mac. The Xamarin development experience is almost identical between Visual Studio on Windows and VS for Mac. The little phone screen that you see here is actually through an app called Reflector, which is mirroring my iPhone X on a bigger screen. So this is actually my real iPhone X, so you can see me swipe around. So the app that I want to show you is this Progress Telerik UI for Xamarin Samples app. And you can find this app in your respective iOS or Android or other app stores. And it really is a great way to kind of play with our controls and see them in action, see how we are rendering some of these controls and how things work in general. So let me dive into some of the newer controls. Okay, so let us begin with the data grid. You'll notice that we are showing you several different ways in which you can see how the data grid functions. So let's go into first look. So this is our data grid, and it is showing lots and lots of records that are bound to it. This one is actually showing some grouping, so I can collapse these headers and I can see how data is grouped. I can sort by ship name, or I can sort by order ID. And then if I click on this ship owner thing, I get into a mode where I can control how exactly I want things to be grouped. So this one's just showing shipping name, but if I have more columns, then I can group by those. And then the user can also select which columns he wants visible or not. So if I cancel this out, you go back and see there is no grouping anymore. Okay, so let us actually take a look at some code as to how this grid exactly functions. Now, the source code for this sample app is also something we give out. So if you simply go out to Telerik.com, and if you navigate down to the product page for UI for Xamarin, click on this big red download free trial button. That's going to give you all of the controls in a free trial, as well as the source code for this app. So if I go in my downloads directory here, you'll see that that's my trial. And then in here is a folder called QSF with the solution. And this has the source code for iOS, Android, UWP, all versions of this app. So I can open this up in Visual Studio. I've actually just kept the iOS version, which is not containing much at all, because everything that we need is actually in this portable class library, which is shared across all platforms. So let's go in here, and I'm going to dive into examples and see that every control has an example here. The data grid is the one that we want, and then the first look example. So here's my view model, and it is super simple. It's just a way for me to show some data on screen. This is using an observable collection of the type order, and we're using a fake data generator here to generate tons of fake data. You'll obviously pull this from your database or whatever be your backend service. So I have a collection of things called orders, and they're held in an observable collection. So now let's take a look at the XAML view, which is the exact grid that you just saw. So in here, you'll see that there are some resources, and in here is the data grid. It has just a few basic things set. I'm setting the item source, the selection modes, and the user edit modes, and so on. Now, the only thing to note here in this data grid is this rad data grid group descriptor, which has the property name ship name. So we are essentially declaring that ship name is the only column in that data grid and the backend data that it's bound to, on which the user can group things. And that's all that it takes. The rest of the UI to exactly make that grouping function, that's up to the user. And that data operations UI happens on a parallel engine, and it's kind of inbuilt with the data grid. Okay, so that's kind of our first look. Let's go back to our app and actually navigate out and look at maybe this load on demand example. So again, this is a simple grid, but it's bound to a collection of things on the back end. You'll notice that here I can sort by the salesperson, but then when it comes to the sales, and if I hit those three little ellipses, it actually takes me into a mode where I can do some filtering based on the ranges that I want to select on, and you get more options on exactly how the user wants to see the visible columns and so on. But the more interesting thing here is this load more button. Now, if I hit this button here, you'll notice that it is actually on the fly loading more data. And if I keep hitting that button, it's going to keep loading more and more data, right? So this is a classic example of the data grid being bound to a huge collection. Not that it's suggested to bind big collections on the client side, but if you did, we want to protect you from like shooting yourselves in the foot. It's going to do some virtualization and kind of bind the data to the grid in chunks, and you get to define exactly how that works. This is showing you the manual mode in which you can kind of load things once the user hits a button, or you can also make this automatic. So as I'm scrolling, as I get to the bottom of the screen, to the bottom of the data set that I'm viewing, it just loads up the next set and so on. So let's take a quick look as to how this one works here. This is my load on demand view model. This has a few more things to it because here's our items collection that we want to build up, and we're just like faking it because the data is all local. So we're just faking some time that it takes to maybe go and do a service call, and we are getting a bunch of items, and then we are filling it up. We are just loading up 10 items at a time, and then we are skipping 10 items if we needed to. So that's our view model. And if you look at the XAML that it takes to kind of get that grid going, it is just as simple as this rad data grid, setting the item source, and so on. The only thing to note here is that load on demand mode is set to manual. Again, you can set that to automatic if you want it to be automatic. And then this is the grid load on demand row style, which kind of defines how that row and how that button looks like. And that's it. The rest of it, the interaction kind of comes naturally. If I go back to the view model here, this is actually a specialized observable collection called load on demand collections, which automatically knows how to fetch the next set. You can simply use an observable collection and you essentially get an event handler. You can go back to your backend services and fetch the next set and so on. So that's how load on demand works, and just a basic look at the data grid. Okay, now, so let's go back to our app, and we will actually navigate back out of the data grid. And let's take a look at the numeric input next. Now this one looks simple, but there is a few things going on behind the scenes. You'll notice that for the age numeric input counter, it says up and down, and I can hit those buttons to make obviously the increment or the decrement work. Notice how it shows up aligned on the left or the right, and I can say plus or minus or whatever else that really I need to. So let's take a look at how this code works here. I'm going to go look at the first look for the numeric input control. In here, you'll notice that there are some resources that do platform-specific things, but at the end of it is just this rad numeric input. Now notice this one being the first one, it is actually using that down, and that's the up. It is actually through this numeric input button that's included in this rad numeric input. So you can have two buttons, and you can kind of have commanding support if you're doing any MVVM, either built in or if you want to bring in an MVVM framework. And that's about it. And you can have change behaviors tied to how the text or the property that it's impacting when you do the increment or the decrement. So that's just up and down on the first one. If I scroll down, notice that this one is plus and minus for the next one, and so on. So just different ways in which how you can have things templated, how you can have commanding support, and how you can really customize the border, the look and feel, and the alignment of every one of these numeric up-down counters. So pretty nifty, right? Let us go back to our app, and we are going to navigate out of this numeric input, and let's take a look next at the new button control. This one has an example called recipes. So this is a classic example of a simple Xamarin Forms button, but on steroids. You'll notice that the first set of buttons here, if I click around here, it is a set of buttons which all use a certain background image, or a combination of different background images. For each of them, they have rounded corners. The second set of buttons are the ones with the popularity index. Notice how they have a flat look to them. They're they don't have the rounded edges, and they're using a little colored border on the left-hand side. And then the third one are a set of buttons, each with a little icon to them. So just an assortment of different ways in which you can render a simple button. And the Telerik button is going to give you all of this flexibility, so you can render the button and make it look however you want for your app. So let's take a quick look at how this code works here. I'm in this recipes view for this button control, as you can see. Here's the content view. You'll notice that it has a few resource dictionaries for the type of styling that we want to use with the button. And then we actually have these rad buttons, right? The first one you'll notice is using that round button style. And then again, the buttons do have commanding support. They have text properties and command parameters that you can send along. And then they can have on-platform specific customizations for iOS, Android, or UWP. You'll notice that this one here is using the file image source property, and it's setting it to a PNG file behind the scenes for iOS, Android, and UWP, just so we can go and find the path name on each of these platforms. So that's how we are rendering the rounded buttons with the background images. If we keep going down to the next one here, let's take a look at the next set of rad buttons here. Notice that this one is actually, let's keep going down. This is still the round button. Right down here, you will see the flat button style. And this one is, again, using a certain width, and it's using certain borders. So notice that border color. So that's how we are rendering the flat look with borders on one side. And again, it has iOS and Android UWP specific renderings for each platform. And then for the last one, again, it is using the round button style, more commanding. And again, it's using a file image source to give us that little icon. And then it kind of blends in with the rest of the buttons color for each of the flat look buttons, but with icons that go with each button. So that's just a quick look at the button. Again, it's just plain XAML that gives you all of these styling and all of these properties to kind of customize the border, the layout, the content for everything that you render. Okay, so let us go back to our app and let's step outside of the button mode. And last but not the least, let's take a quick look at this new entry control that we have. This is a super simple form, and each one of these fields, the first name, last name, and email, are actually the Telerik entry controls. Looks simple, but again, lots going on behind the scenes. So I can customize exactly how I want those entry fields to look like. Notice how they kind of blend into the background, and I can have custom watermark. I can control the border, the layout, the foreground color, the background color, everything about those entry controls. So let's quickly take a look at the code here. This is again the first look view under the entry control. Notice how it's just a grid, and in here are these rad entry controls. Notice how they have simple background colors, watermark text, text colors, and so on. And that's really all it takes. Again, you can control the height, the border, everything, the padding, everything about these entry controls. So that was just a quick look at the various new input controls and the data grids and the theming mechanisms and the toolbox, everything new that we have for you in our Xamarin Suite for the R1 release. The best way, again, if I go back to the app here, the best way to kind of play around with these new controls is the sample app. So you can see all of these controls in action, how we are rendering it, and you get to see how you can customize things to fine-tune the appearance of each of these controls in your app. So that's all with the demos. Let's go back to the slides. Okay, so that was just a quick look at some of the new controls that we have. But we aren't stopping there. There are improvements and fine-tuning throughout the rest of our Xamarin Suite. There are essential controls like different types of charts and graphs, list views and gauges and calendars, things that are really hard to create by hand. So don't go reinvent the wheel. We are trying to give you all the ammunition that you need to go build amazing Xamarin apps. So the other aspect of building mobile apps with .NET is obviously Microsoft's Universal Windows Platform. And we have a full suite of UI controls just for you. It's Telerik UI for UWP. Now this suite has 20 plus really polished and well-made UI controls to kind of light up all your UWP apps, not just for phones, for tablets, for desktops, for HoloLens, for Surface Hub, you name it. And the best news is the entire suite of controls is truly free and open source. It's part of the .NET Foundation. It's part of us sharing the love with you guys. If you're using Windows Template Studio, you'll find some of these controls built in. So once again, you have all the ammunition to go build beautiful UWP apps. So the one other thing I wanted to mention was for mobile apps, often we get to delight the user with cloud services that are powering the app. So backend as a service. And sure, there are lots of offerings, but the one that I wanted to highlight was something called Kinvey. This is beautiful, it's lightweight, it has SDKs for just about every platform, and from a single dashboard, you can do just about everything like social authentication, push notifications, data storage, connecting to your enterprise data store, and including serverless architectures. So take a look around and see what Kinvey can do for your app. Okay, let me finally close things out with some resources that point to our product pages from where you can get everything else. And of course, bookmark the docs because that's going to get you any of the reference APIs that you need as you're using our controls. All right, so that is it from me. The bottom line is we are trying to give you polished UI for all platforms and cloud services so you can go build engaging mobile apps. So once again, my name is Sam Basu, and I thank you so much for the time that you spent with us. So with that, back to you, John.
Thanks, Sam. It's great to see all the improvements we've made to the mobile space, especially around Xamarin. I'd like to switch gears and talk about what's new for developers targeting the desktop through WinForms and WPF. Let's begin with the latest features in Telerik UI for WPF. As some of you know, our component suite for WPF provides an extensive set of controls for building rich, beautiful desktop applications. It features over 120 controls with themes, touch support, document processing, integrated MVVM, and many others that will help developers be super productive when building WPF apps. Over the lifetime of our desktop controls, we've incorporated over 20 professional-looking themes to help developers style their applications in rich and beautiful ways. With the R1’18 release of Telerik UI for WPF, we've added a new Fluent theme based on Fluent Design. Fluent Design is a design language that was first introduced by Microsoft at the Build Conference 2017. It's comprised of foundational elements like light, depth, motion, material, and scale. For this release, we've applied some of those aspects to the Fluent Design theme we have for our WPF controls, incorporating elements like light and material to draw the user's attention and highlight important information. We are proud to be the first suite of WPF controls on the market to include a Fluent theme. Utilizing this theme will provide a fresh and modern look to your WPF apps running on Windows. The file dialog was introduced as a new control in the previous release of Telerik UI for WPF. Since then, we have received a lot of feedback through our forums and support system on this new control. I'm happy to report that we've added many new features to the control. With this control, you can now perform operations like create new folders, rename files and folders, use Windows context menu, dereference the location of shortcuts, and much more. The pivot grid is a popular control with developers working with large sets of data. It's a control that can be used to aggregate millions of records in a concise tabular format. This data can be easily grouped, filtered, sorted, and manipulated to create different reports. In the R1’18 release of Telerik UI for WPF, we're adding support for editing. This allows users to modify cell values. Developers can capture event notifications on what was changed and perform any necessary recalculations. Users will then be able to see their immediate impact. The grid view is a control that's great for displaying large amounts of tabular data in a form that's intuitive to users. In this release, we've added the ability to freeze columns on the right side of the control. We've also added a new Can User Search in Hidden Columns property, which allows users to perform searches on hidden columns. In the R1’18 release, we are introducing two new controls, PDF Viewer Toolbar and Spreadsheet Ribbon. These are accompanying controls for the PDF Viewer and Spreadsheet. We introduced these controls to eliminate the need to build these out on your own. We even took a step further by presenting you with a convenient dialog when you drag PDF Viewer or Spreadsheet to the design surface in Visual Studio, so that you can pick which of the accompanying controls you want to add with just a few clicks. The Map control is another popular control in Telerik UI for WPF. In this release, we've added 5 new imagery sets for the Bing REST map provider. These new sets are Aerial on Demand, Road on Demand, Canvas Dark, Canvas Light, and Canvas Gray. Integrating these new sets will allow you to provide better options to your users who may wish to have them displayed. And finally, the PDF Viewer now offers support for secured PDF documents that use RC4 with 40 or 128-bit key sizes, as well as AES with 128-bit key sizes. Additionally, you can now create and manipulate PDF files using some of these encryptions with RAD PDF processing. Let's jump into a demo to see some of these new features. First, let's explore the new Fluent theme we've added to Telerik UI for WPF. This theme is one of many themes available. One of the best ways to view our built-in themes is with the Telerik Color Theme Generator. It's a tool that allows you to modify colors against live controls. As you can see, I have the tool set to use the new Fluent theme. Selectable controls have light effects applied to them as I navigate over them with the mouse. You may have noticed an acrylic accent to the background that can be seen appearing through the elements like the title bar and any empty space in the app. This gives the application depth as outlined by the Fluent design language. The end result is a WPF application that adheres to the same look and feel of modern applications you'll find on Windows 10. The Fluent theme has 2 color variations, one light and one dark. You can see this in the Examples app that we provide online and in the Microsoft Store. Both of these variations are designed to be easily modified via the exposed colors in the theme palette. When using the Fluent theme, you can dynamically change the font size and font family properties of all components in the application. This is the same as a few other themes we include. Visual effects helpers are also available to control the theme's acrylic effect and material assist. Through attached properties, you can modify the appearance of a specific control without the need to alter its control template. We like to think the addition of the Fluent theme is a big deal. It will allow you to incorporate a modern look and feel across your applications built in WPF. Let's quickly look at a couple more new features. As I stated previously, we are adding accompanying controls for the PDF Viewer and Spreadsheet. Here in Visual Studio, I'll drag and drop a PDF Viewer control onto my design surface. When I do this, you'll notice a dialog appears that allows you to incorporate additional components, including the new toolbar. Pretty nice. Let's delete this control and add a spreadsheet. Again, we're presented with a dialog that provides an option to add a ribbon. If we run this application, you can see that we've added the spreadsheet control along with an integrated ribbon. Now let's move on to see what's new in Telerik UI for WinForms. As some of you may know, we provide over 120 controls for Windows Forms with thousands of built-in features like document processing, built-in themes, multi-touch support, accessibility compliance, and much more. In this release of Telerik UI for WinForms, we've added a new Fluent theme. This incorporates the same look and feel we built in Telerik UI for WPF. This provides consistency across both sets of UI controls that we have for the desktop, and we're proud to be the first WinForms suite on the market that includes it. Joining our suite of controls in Telerik UI for WinForms is a brand new one called the Rad Barcode. This control allows you to work with barcodes in your WinForms apps. It can display the most common formats frequently used in sectors like retail, manufacturing, and more. Often, it's helpful for developers to see controls in action in order to gain a better understanding of what they look like and how they work. We have created a new ERP demo application which uses the components in Telerik UI for WinForms and demonstrates how you can use them to address similar cases and scenarios. You can find these applications in the Telerik UI for WinForms example app that's available on our website or through the Microsoft Store if you're running Windows 10. The PDF Viewer control in Telerik UI for WinForms now supports RC4 and AES, just like its counterpart in Telerik UI for WPF. Secured PDF documents using these algorithms can be validated and displayed within this control. The Map control allows you to incorporate maps into your WinForms apps. These maps are serviced by external providers such as Bing. In the latest release of Telerik UI for WinForms, we've added Ordnance Survey, Aerial with Labels on Demand, and Roads on Demand. And finally, we've updated the scheduler with search functionality. With it, you can now easily find meetings or any attached resources. Users can type in the search criteria in the search bar, and a list will be populated with any events or resources that match it. This will allow users to quickly find these items and perform operations against them if necessary. Now let's spend a few minutes looking at what's new in Telerik Reporting. Telerik Reporting provides a complete .NET reporting solution for web, mobile, and desktop applications. It has a complete feature set, allowing you to create, view, and export rich, beautiful, and interactive reports. It's everything that a lightweight and versatile reporting solution should be. We've been working hard on many new features and improvements in this release. For users whose first language isn't English, I'm happy to share with you that the Report Designer has been localized to support other languages. We've exposed all necessary text resources to enable localization capabilities for the Report Designer tool. Developers can now translate and deploy the Report Designer in a language of their choice to better target their audience. The R1’18 Release simplifies the data connectivity process by providing a Telerik Reporting exclusive bundle of the Progress Data Direct ODBC drivers free of charge. This allows developers to connect their reports to most of the major databases used today. And finally, we've made desktop applications that use Telerik Reporting accessible to a wider audience, including users with motor control restrictions and those who need assistive technologies. This is especially important for banking, government institutions, and big enterprise applications where accessibility support is a must. To wrap things up, I'd like to direct our focus towards the future by providing you with a preview of what's coming so that you can plan accordingly. Let's bring back Stefan to talk more about it.
Thanks, John. Before we wrap up, let me share some details from the kitchen on what we will be working on in the next release. As a disclaimer, I would like to mention that everything you hear is subject to change. After all, we live in a very dynamic environment. As a leader in the UI components space, we closely track the trends around UI. All of you have heard of chatbots, and I am pleased to share that we will be working on enabling you to leverage those in your applications across the board for web, mobile, and desktop. This is just a teaser, so stay tuned to what's to come. On top of that, you can expect new components in the jQuery flavor of Kendo UI, including ASP.NET MVC and ASP.NET Core, such as drop-down tree and a brand new material theme. AJAX will be brought up to date with the latest Kendo UI versions, hence gaining plenty of new features. Kendo UI for React and Angular will also be boosted with some interesting additions. As I mentioned earlier, join us in the Kendo UI webinar tomorrow for more information on this front. In Xamarin, you can expect further expanding our controls portfolio with the barcode and preview components to cover more and more scenarios. On the desktop side, with UI for WinForms, we will be working on image editor components so you can enable your users to make basic image modifications without leaving your app. In WPF, based on popular demand, we will be introducing built-in mask for the mask input control, as well as we are planning on some awesome charting animations to make them charts even better looking. Reporting is going to bring in support for page breaks for more flexibility in the report creation. And both reporting and report server will feature digital signing of the output PDF documents. These are the highlights that we will be focusing on. I would like to invite you all to share your feedback and to keep your requests coming on feedback.telerik.com. This way we can see what you guys need and provide you with it. With that, I would like to pass the mic to John to wrap it up.
Wonderful stuff. Thanks a lot for that, Stefan. Just before we wrap things up, I'd like you to know that we'll be hosting the Progress Next conference from May 29th to June 1st in beautiful Boston, Massachusetts. Registration is now open and filling up fast. You can find out more and register at www.progress.com/next. There's one more thing that I'd like to share with you. Very soon, we'll be launching a new 24/7 on-demand training program with more than 30 hours of technical content that's designed to quickly get you onboarded and successful with our developer tools, whether you've been using them for years or are new to the suite. Valued at over $10,000, this offering will be free with your license subscription. These videos will provide practical knowledge combined with helpful approaches to application development across a wide range of our offerings, including Kendo UI, Telerik UI for ASP.NET AJAX, MVC, Xamarin, WPF, WinForms, Telerik reporting, and more. Watch your inbox in early February for more details. So that about wraps it up for us. On behalf of the team, I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's webinar. As you've seen, there's a ton of great stuff in the latest release of Telerik UI. Please make sure to keep an eye out on our blogs for more articles about this or for any other future announcements. And in the meantime, please go check out the latest bits and tell us what you think. Thanks again, and we hope to see you next time.